Hi poetry lovers, welcome to my channel Bella Poetry Presents. My name is Bella and I love beautiful poetry. In this segment of our second series, The Best Love Poetry and the Poets That Penned It, we will discuss another wonderful American poet, Dorothy Parker. Dorothy Parker was also known as Dot or Dottie. She was born Dorothy Rothschild on August 22nd, 1893. Her father was a Jewish man, the descendant of Austrian Jews, and his name was Jacob Rothschild, and his mother's name, her mother's name was Eliza Annie, and she was of Scottish descent. Dorothy Parker was born at 732 Ocean Avenue in the seaside town of Long Branch, New Jersey. Unfortunately, Dorothy's mom passed away very early in 1898 when she turned 5 years old. And 2 years later, her father Jacob married another woman whose name was Eleanor Frances Lewis in 1900. Now, Parker has been said to have hated her father and her stepmother. She claimed that they physically abused her. She refused to call Eleanor her stepmother mother or stepmother or even Eleanor. She called her the housekeeper, which was quite telling. However, her biographer, Marian Mead, kind of disclaims this notion that they were abusive to her. She says that the accounts were largely false, and that Dorothy Parker grew up in a very supportive, loving, and generous household. So I guess the truth lies somewhere in between. So finally, her stepmother died in 1903 when Dorothy turned only 9 years old. Parker grew up on the Upper Side and attended a Roman Catholic school, although her father was Jewish and her stepmother was Protestant. But when she turned 15 years old, she had to quit school to help her ailing father. She graduated later. In the last couple of years, she attended Dana's School for Girls, kind of finishing school, and she graduated in 1911 at the age of 18. But when she turned 20, 1913, her father Jacob died. And so, Dorothy Parker had to support herself by playing the piano in the dancing studio and writing poetry. She sold her first poem, that was called Annie Porch, to Vanity Fair magazine in 1914. And some month later, she was hired as an editorial assistant at the Vogue. She moved to Vanity Fair as the staff writer after 2 years in the Vogue. And then in 1917, she married a man whose name was Edwin Parker. She kept his last name for the rest of her life. And Edwin Parker was a stockbroker, but he was also an alcoholic and a morphine addict. And so the marriage was dissolved in 1928. They were married 11 years, and the last few years the marriage was basically over. They were just not divorced legally. Dorothy Parker also self-medicated. The choice of medicine for her was alcohol. She often jokingly said about herself that she was not a writer with a drinking problem, but she was a drinker with a writing problem. Parker's career took off in 1918. She was writing theater criticism for Vanity Fair. Her caustic wit made her very popular, but then again, the same caustic wit got her fired in January 1920 because she managed to offend a lot of people. But she didn't give up, and she started working for Ainsley magazine, which had even a higher circulation. But she continued to publish in Vanity Fair that preferred her as a writer rather than the employee. Then Harold Ross founded the New Yorker in 1925, and Dorothy Parker became a member of the board of editors. She published her work in the second issue of the New Yorker and continued to publish in this magazine for the next 30 years. After that, Dorothy Parker was extremely prolific. In 1920 alone, she published 300 poems in free verse in various magazines: Vogue, Vanity Fair, McCall, and The Cunning Tower, and Life magazine, and the New Republic periodical. So she became quite popular and famous. She published her first volume of poetry called Enough Rope in 1926 to a great critical acclaim. The book sold 47,000 copies, which is a lot for a poetry book. She released 2 more volumes of verse called Sunset Gun in 1928, Death in Texas in 1931, along with short story collections, Laments for the Living in 1930, and After Such Pleasures in 1933. Her best-known short story, Big Blonde, was published in the Bookman's magazine and was awarded the O. Henry Award for the Best Short Story in 1929. We said that eventually, as I said before, in 1928, Dorothy Parker separated, divorced her husband, and she was quite depressed. She tried to kill herself. This was her first attempt at suicide. She had about 3 attempts at suicide during her lifetime. This was the first one. She slit her wrists, but luckily was saved in time. And after him, she had quite a few affairs and relationships with different men. And one of them was a playwright, MacArthur, Charles MacArthur. She got pregnant with his child, and she had an abortion, which was followed by a deep depression. And she tried to kill herself again by taking a bottle of sleeping pills. But then she called for a room service and was saved at the last moment. In 1932, Dorothy Parker met a man, Alan Campbell. He was an actor, and he also had aspirations of becoming a playwright. 2 years later, they got married in New Mexico. And it's interesting to note that Alan Campbell's parents had a reverse history than Dorothy Parker. His mother was Jewish, German Jewish, and his father was of a Scottish descent. But later, she found out that Alan Campbell was bisexual. She publicly proclaimed that he was as queer as a billy goat. The pair moved to Hollywood. They were great collaborators, business partners. They moved to Hollywood, and they signed a 10-week contract with Paramount Pictures. They were earning quite a lot for those times. Parker earned about $1,000 per week, Campbell $250, and at some point they were earning up to $5,000 per week, which obviously was a huge amount of money for those times. She and Campbell received writing credits for 15 films, among them from 1934 to 1941. Among them were the famous films like A Star is Born, Smash Up. These 2 movies, by the way, received Oscar nominations. Their marriage also ended in divorce. They came back. They were bound in this dance of push and pull because they were not just spouses, but they were collaborators. They worked together. So like her first husband, Edwin Parker, Campbell also died of drug overdose. So we can say that Dorothy Parker was not particularly lucky in her marriages. During the 1930s and 1940s, Parker became an increasingly vocal advocate for civil liberties and civil rights. After she got divorced, she moved back to New York, and settled in Volney Residential Hotel that basically took care of all her needs. Life there was convenient and comfortable, and she stayed in this hotel until her death on June 7, 1967, from a heart attack. She was 73 years old. In her will, she left her estate to Martin Luther King, and upon his death to NAACP, and she kind of slighted her best friend Lillian Hellman, who was also Norther. They were very good friends, and they spent a lot of time together, but Dorothy Parker didn't leave her any money in her will. And so Lillian Hellman was extremely upset with her, and she, as a revenge, I guess, destroyed all the papers that were in Dorothy's apartment. So that was pretty mean act on her part. Well, Dorothy's body was cremated. The urn with her ashes kind of sat on a shelf. Nobody claimed it until in 1988, NAACP claimed her remains and designed a memorial garden for them outside its Baltimore headquarters. And on the plaque, they wrote, "Here lie the ashes of Dorothy Parker, humorist, writer, critic, defender of human and civil rights. This memorial garden is dedicated to her noble spirit, which celebrated the oneness of humankind. And it's also dedicated to the bonds of everlasting friendship between Black and Jewish people, dedicated by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People." But for 15 years, her family tried to get the urn back and put it to rest next to her father's grave in Woodlawn Cemetery in Bronx. And finally, they succeeded. On August 18th, 2020, Parker's urn was exhumed. 2 executives from the NAACP spoke, and a rabbi who had attended her initial burial said Kaddish. So this is the story of Dorothy Parker's life. And I'm going to read 2 of her quotes. The first one: "Better be left by 20 dears than lie in a loveless bed. Better a loaf that's wet with tears than cold, unsalted bread." Very nice quote. And the second one is, "4 be the things that I'd have been better without: love, curiosity, freckles, and doubt." And a poem, a poem that we will read today is called Nocturne. And here it is. "Always I knew that it couldn't last, gathering clouds and the snowflakes flying. Now it is part of the golden past, darkening skies and the night wind sighing. It is but cowardice to pretend, cover with ashes our love's cold crater. Always I've known that it had to end, sooner or later. Always I knew it would come like this, pattering rain and the grasses springing. Sweeter to you is a new love's kiss, flickering sunshine and young birds singing. Gone are the raptures that once we knew. Now you're finding a new joy greater. Well, I'll be doing the same thing too, sooner or later." And with this poem, we bring this segment to the end. Please visit us next week. We'll be discussing the life of another very famous American poet, E.E. Cummings. Thank you very much for visiting. I hope you enjoyed this segment and learned something new. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is extremely important to us. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.